A dominant nation in the production of nuclear missiles, and you believe it will avoid world wars? Well, we have the latest surprising step. Kim Jong North-Un's Korean military soldiers have arrived in Ukraine. But why is North Korea denying its involvement in Russia's war in Ukraine? Why is it hiding the truth that Russia is backing away? Recently, Kim Jong-un praised the country's military tradition at a celebration banquet, and this comes as no surprise if we say that North Korea's armed forces are on their way to helping Russia. He said that despite the odds, the country's military had kept going through the years to become a great and absolute power. This was likely a reference to North Korea's ability to make nuclear weapons. According to Kim, the Korean People's Army was the strongest in the world and radiated an extraordinary sense of responsibility and an unbreakable superhuman willpower. The soldiers were the most honorable people in North Korea because they fought for their bright future. He also called for redoubled efforts to build up the army and help the socialist cause. But the most recent news is Pyongyang appears to be a reluctant player in Putin's deadly offensive in Eastern Europe. The Korean War is going to start up again, which is like history repeating itself, not on the Korean peninsula but in Eastern Europe. North Korea and South Korea are both thinking about sending military supplies to Russia and Ukraine respectively to help with the war that is already going on. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization is putting more and more pressure on South Korea to sell weapons to Ukraine. This is because South Korea agreed to sell weapons to the United States, which would then be sent to Ukraine. South Korea's policy has always been to not give arms directly to a country that is currently at war. North Korea is said to have been making artillery shells for Russia across the demilitarized zone in exchange for oil, gas, and flour from Russia. Satellite pictures seem to show that these kinds of trades are happening. An arms deal with Russia worth hundreds of millions of dollars would help North Korea's economy, which has been hurt by the pandemic. Pyongyang is also looking for people to work on rebuilding projects in eastern Ukraine from its companies in Russia. Even though it's not surprising that North Korea is helping Russia with its military, it is surprising that it keeps denying doing so. In November, North Korea's military issued a public statement in response to what it saw as moves by the United States to taint the image of the DPRK in the international arena by invoking the illegal sanctions resolution of the UN Security Council against the DPRK. In January, Pyongyang warned Washington again that trying to smear the DPRK's image by making up something that doesn't exist is a grave provocation that can never be tolerated and can only make it react. Even more interesting is that Kim Jong, the sister of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, said in public that North Korea would always stand in the same trench with the army and the people of Russia. North Korea is a social outcast around the world, so it has almost nothing to lose by getting involved. So why does it keep denying it? One possibility is that, like South, North Korea was forced by Russia to get involved in the mess in Ukraine. The war has added to a geopolitical situation that was already tense. North Korea is busy dealing with a long list of problems such as a shrinking economy, the unpredictable spread of the pandemic, and rising tensions with the US and South Korea. And since the hermit state usually takes up a lot of Washington's time, the war in Ukraine has used up all the energy the US had left to deal with it. North Korea has recently taken advantage of the fact that it has nuclear weapons by testing missiles while the US is focused on events in Ukraine. However, unlike in the past, these tests do not get as much attention from the US. North Korea's policy towards the US is also being hurt by Russia's war, which is an important point. In the past, North Korea could easily switch from confrontation to engagement without involving other players. Now, however, its power for power policy is tied to Russia's war and cannot be separated from it. North Korea probably knows that resuming talks with the United States is unlikely as long as it keeps sending weapons to Russia. This is why Pyongyang has always denied sending arms to Russia, and the basic agreement between the two countries says that North Koreans can't fight in the war, probably to avoid being seen as sending mercenaries. Pyongyang doesn't want its troops to fight NATO troops on the front line because that would ruin any chance of talks with the US. North Korea put off sending workers to eastern Ukraine because it was worried about their safety. This shows how much it wants to avoid putting its workers in a situation where they have to fight. But just like South Korea can't ignore the United States when it comes to military matters, North Korea can't ignore Russia, which is one of its biggest backers. Moscow continues to be a way for North Korea to avoid being completely cut off politically and economically by China. And North Korea is counting on Russian help more and more in the unlikely case that it goes to war with South Korea again. North Korea is trying to keep its relationship with the US from getting worse by sending military supplies to Russia without the US knowing. It is just hedging its bets and not trying to gain much from the war in Ukraine. North Korea's help for Russia seems to be more of a happy accident than a planned alliance. If this is true, there is still hope that North Korea won't completely stop talking to the US, even though it talks like it wants to go to war. If the war in Ukraine ends, it might make it easier for the US and North Korea to get along. Now, after knowing this, what more can we expect from Kim Jong-un in 2023? North Korea has fired more missiles in 1 year than it ever had before. In fact, in 2022, a quarter of all the missiles North Korea has ever fired hit the air. It was also the year that Kim Jong-un announced that North Korea had become a nuclear weapons state and that its weapons were here to stay. This has made things worse on the Korean peninsula than they have been since 2017 when US President Donald Trump threatened North Korea with fire and fury. So, what will happen next? North Korea made big improvements to its weapons in 2022. It started the year by testing short-range missiles that could hit South Korea. After that, it tested mid-range missiles that could hit Japan. By the end of the year, it had successfully tested the Hwasong-17, which is its most powerful intercontinental ballistic missile to date and could theoretically hit anywhere on the US mainland. Mr. Kim has also made it easier for him to use nuclear weapons. After saying in September that North Korea had become an irreversible nuclear weapons state, he said that these weapons could now be used to win a war, not just to stop one. So, what missiles have North Korea been testing? As the year was coming to an end, he called together the members of his ruling Workers' Party to talk about what he wanted to do in 2023. On top of his list is to exponentially increase the production of nuclear weapons. He said that this must include making a lot of small, tactical nuclear weapons that could be used against South Korea in a war. North Korea launched its strongest ICBM to date in November 2022. In late 2022, North Korea launched its most powerful ICBM to date. North Korea must first make a small nuclear bomb that can fit on a small missile before it can make tactical nuclear weapons. The world hasn't seen proof that Pyongyang can do this yet. The intelligence community spent most of 2022 waiting for it to test such a device, but the test never happened. We've come to the end of today's video, but don't worry, if you want to keep up with the latest war news, just hit the subscribe button.